Welcome, everyone, to Watch Challenge. On each episode, we challenge ourselves to find and watch a film of a particular type and then report back the results to each other and you fine listeners. My name is Mike Wendt.
And I'm Aaron Spears. This episode's Halloween theme is continuing. We challenged ourselves to dig into the J horror subgenre, which is Japanese horror. In my mind, Mike, before I did any Googling, before I did any
Sure.
research on this one, I was like, okay, there's like a late 90s, early 2000s American remake.
Yes.
Kind of, I don't know, say problem, issue. Depends on your point of view on those particular movies to it. So, like, I've got it as this the like 90s trend in Japanese horror film. That's kind of what I was expecting going into it. And it was one of those where I was like, once I started digging in a little bit, I was like, all right, I'm discovering some more nuance to this than what I was actually picturing.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely quite a long history of horror in Japanese film that I found. Dating back to the 50s and 60s, and some of those just might be some of those honorable mentions or picks.
Nice.
But yeah, it's they definitely are very stylistic, very beautiful looking films.
Oh, yeah.
Even though sometimes they might be extremely violent and bloody.
Those are definitely the ones I've got lined up. But like, I think it was, I know like we both worked at theaters over the years for a number of
Yeah.
years, actually. I was around as some of my multiplex days overlapped with when like Dark Water with Jennifer Connelly came
Mhm.
out, but also
Yep.
like The Grudge and obviously The Ring in America, the Gore Verbinski film with Naomi Watts, really kind of ignited it on the American side.
Yeah.
Those being the remakes, obviously. But it was interesting how that ended up being a trend for the Hollywood. Like, of course, Hollywood has to remake it because who the hell's going to watch subtitles?
Right.
So it was like a remake horror trend in Hollywood, which it was kind of interesting. Also, being October, I'm like reading a lot about horror films and like the horror histories and all that stuff. The 90s studio horror that we had with like the Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer,
Mhm.
Faculty, well, even like a Halloween H2O kind of is in that ballpark. And then like
Yeah.
that shift, which I really did enjoy, that shift into like The Ring and The Grudge and Dark Water and all of that. I do remember going to the Cinematheque here locally in Cleveland because John Ewing was programming all of the original J horror stuff
Yeah.
because everybody was interested in like the remake stuff. So that was really cool. And actually, one of the movies I picked, even I got to see on the big screen thanks to them doing like the let's program the origin of this trend that we've got going on here in Hollywood. But I dug it because once I got into some of the J horror I watched then, and then some of the stuff I watch now for this episode, I was really digging how it's not just like, and I'm not knocking like Scream or like I'm knocking H2O a little bit in this.
Yeah.
That trend in American horror of just like jump scares and teenage, like making sure all the music cues are great for the teens to go watch.
Yeah.
And the J horror stuff, I love the like kind of the slow burn, like the psychological
Yeah.
with your head element. I think I dig that a little bit more than I do some of the 90s Hollywood horror stuff.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the '90s horror. I mean that was a prime area of growing up for me. So I do remember going to see a lot of those in the theater. I do remember going to H2O, and my friend and I, of course, were a little bit younger, but laughing hysterically at a certain scene in which a head starts rolling down the hill.
Yeah.
Um,
Funny's
but,
funny, man.
but yeah, you're right. I mean, it was. I think a lot of times it was about putting those fresh faces, putting a soundtrack that people would buy. So it was more the flash over substance. Where
Yeah.
I think it's an opposite with J horror is where it's like almost everything kind of works on a certain level, even though there's a panache and there's tends to be an artistic quality that might be perceived as flashy, but I think it's because a lot of time we're not as familiar with those actors. I don't know, it just kind of all comes together in a very creepy way, in a very realistic way.
Yeah. Well, even some of the stuff I was reading up on with J horror was really kind of capturing my imagination, and just even reading about some of its origins and where horror, like the place that the horror film specifically genre has within different societies, I find really kind of fascinating because it's
Mhm.
tapping into, societal like dreads or fears, that sort of thing. One of the ones I found, like, let me try it this way. So, like, when you're picturing in your head, like the original Ring, or I'm not even going to try to mispronounce horribly the original The Grudge, like all those that came out of like the 90s J horror stuff, some of which you may or may not be talking about in a second.
Sure.
Um, there's one image that I always had in my head, and that was like probably like a preteen or maybe like a teen girl or maybe even younger with like black hair, like maybe kind of really pale skinned. Like it's a creepy look.
Yeah.
And in doing a little bit of digging in this, I found a lot of this stuff in Japanese culture came out of Japanese folklore. Like there's actually the way we'd think of like Baba Yaga character of like a witch or a pagan tradition.
Yes.
They have one called an onryu, Onryu, out of Japanese folklore that ends up being like this female entity that's returning to avenge herself, often has one or both eyes concealed with like hair. I was like, oh my God, it's describing exactly what I was terrified of
Right.
in these movies. But like it has like this deep cultural resonance because it's been around in like, in paintings and books and everything else, like, predating even film in some cases. But why not pop this up in film? Because it's terrified people for generations, apparently. So now let's keep that going with film.
No, absolutely. I think, and there's, and I would not consider myself an expert in Japanese cinema, even though, I do know quite a few of the filmmakers, but that seems to be a trend that goes across a lot of genres in Japanese, especially, you look at the films of Kurosawa,
Mhm.
goes into a lot of the the Japanese myths and
Yeah.
legends and all that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, the fact that they would dip into that, just seems like a very natural
Yeah.
thing that they would do.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Did you have like any first inclinations, like when you first ran across J horror? Like when you saw The Ring or The Grudge, did you go and find the original stuff? Or did
Yeah, I mean, and that's I guess that kind of like jumps into I was my one of my honorable mentions
Mhm.
is Ringu or the original version of the Ring, because I do remember liking the Ring quite a bit, but then this was, I think that it came out my first year of college, so it was really into torrenting
Oh yeah.
movies. So sorry, MPAA. Yeah, please forgive me. But ended up finding the original Ring, and Ringu, and
Mhm.
thought it was a pretty terrifying film. I
Oh
mean
yeah.
the whole concept of it, of putting this videotape, seeing these like images, and then having a curse on you is it's kind of like, I mean, it's kind of a brilliant concept to begin with,
Oh
but
yeah.
the way how it's done, the original style, where the Gore Verbinski version I think is actually pretty good, but it is we kind of get slightly the Hollywood ending, I guess. But that one, I mean, the original J horror version is,
Yeah.
I mean, has images that I still think about
Oh yeah.
sometimes, and I think actually the actual clip that the people are watching is also more terrifying than the American version.
I
Like
think
it's a
so
little
too.
more grotesque, I would say,
Yeah.
a little more frightening. And so that was pretty much in, like, I was probably a late bloomer to just watching a lot of foreign films in general. Not until I got to college, and I'm sure maybe that's a little different now, like because there's more things available. But yeah, that was definitely something that really opened my eyes to what other cultures make in horror.
That's true. Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think it's kind of an access issue because the growing up like in the '90s and then heading off to college in like the late '90s,
Yeah,
it just it you didn't have the quick access. Like I could just I mean I try not to, but like I could just I could watch that clip from Ringu right now, like on my phone, if I was a 14-year-old. I was like,
Yeah.
well, that I mean, I'm glad there's access to that and there's exposure to it, but at the same time, it's like, well, when you had to really dig it out or find it or torrent it, like you were deliberately choosing to spend your time and like I'm gonna sit down and watch this thing. I feel like it was a better grabbing of attention back then than maybe it is right now. But
Yeah, I think,
give it
just to give you a little context of my, where I was, like, I think one of the first films that I saw that was foreign, or, not like British foreign, but
right.
was probably Crouching Tiger a few years before.
Yeah, yeah,
Like Itu Mama Tambien or something like that.
right.
Like that was a pretty big hit. So like I don't know. I sometimes am a little bit ashamed to admit that, and but I think I've made up for it in the
Yes,
last
yeah.
20 years or so. But yeah, there was definitely some blind spots growing up. But I don't know. It's like I'm. It's sometimes I'm like jealous of kids now who just have access to like so much more.
Well, I mean, in the glasses half full category, we're going to get some really fascinating art out of that because, kids that are like super into anime, when they're like 11, 12, 13 years old, like they don't give a shit if they have to read subtitles, if the access
Exactly.
to foreign films is there. So like, oh yeah, I've seen all the Godard movies. Now I'm ready to start film school. Like, okay, what are you going to make? Holy shit.
Right.
It's going to be pretty amazing. I have one of my honorable mentions is right from around the time period of Ringu
Yeah.
as well. It's actually ties up perfectly because it's the same studio. The Omega Project is the name of the studio. I think I have that one right. That doesn't sound right now that I'm saying it out loud, but that's what I wrote down in my notes. I'm sticking with it.
Yeah.
They wanted to do a follow up because Ringu was not only a hit. I almost said stateside. That's more like a term we use here. Ringu was not only a hit in Japan when it came out, but it had a lot of crossover appeal, and obviously
Mhm.
then was bought. Remake rights were purchased by a major Hollywood studio, and that was itself a huge hit. So they started developing another project, and they brought on Takashi Miike to direct
Mm.
in 1999 Audition,
Yes.
which was one of those that I caught on the big screen at the Cinematheque, and it was one of those watches where like it scarred me, like, but in
Yeah,
that
yeah,
great cinematic way, where like I didn't know you could do that in a movie. Oh my god!
yeah.
Um, so this was an interesting one in which the premise on this one is like there's a widower with a small child, a boy, I believe, son, and his friend is like a casting agent or he's a producer, so he sets up like auditions as a way for this guy to like audition in quotes women like to find a new mate, to find a new wife, a new mate, a new partner, and that's a dicey situation already. It's a very objectifying of women in general. And this movie really plays with that. I think it's a really interesting kind of. There's a way you could do a feminist read on this because he does find a woman does capture his fancy, I guess, as you would say, and he follows her, and it gets steadily fucking creepier as it goes until you're. At least I was just horrified by the ending. And obviously, I'm not going to spoil anything or anything like that here, but there's a really interesting kind of feminist read within a lot of J horror that I was reading about in the last week or so.
Mhm.
And this one in particular, you remember at the time having discussions with friends where like, yeah, it's revenge for just straight up objectifying of women within the culture, within blah. You can read all kinds of stuff into it, but there's also this interesting fear in this movie of male fear of female sexuality. You can kind of read into as well. Also, it's just fucking terrifying.
Yeah.
Well, so if you just want like the shock value of that's fucked up. I can't believe they put this on film. Takashi Miike is definitely your guy
Oh
from
my
the
god.
J horror category, and we're not even discussing like Ishi the Killer or some of his other stuff. But Audition itself, I think, is a good intro. If you liked Ringu or you liked the original source material for The Grudge, Audition is right up your alley. Like that's a great, great October watch to really just creep you the fuck out.
Yeah. No, he's definitely a gem of Japanese cinema. I actually really quite enjoyed his most. Maybe he made one more recently, but it was a couple years ago called First Love. I thought was very very good. Just another violent, very violent movie, but it's done in such like a beautiful way.
Yeah, yeah. He's getting away with the visuals, and he's also one of those guys that if you look up his filmography, he does like 4 to 6 movies and also television a year. Like he just cannot stop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so good.
What else you got in the honorable mentions, Mike?
One of the, it over the last couple years or so, that has kind of got this like large cult following, is from 1977 called House.
Ooh.
So House is a very, very interesting film. It's kind of like it is a horror film, but it's almost like a lighthearted comedy at parts. It's sometimes like there's a lot of fantasy elements to it, but it's basically about these I believe it's six girls who go to their aunt's home, and one by one weird things start happening, and some of them start to kind of go by the wayside. But this is one of those films where I had seen, I'd heard about, and then saw a trailer for it, that was going to be playing at the Cleveland Cinematheque, and it's just every now and then you hear just somebody saying "house, house" throughout the trailer,
Yeah.
like maybe like three or four times.
Yeah.
House. House.
But it's such a like a technicolor dream of a movie, and it's I'm once again, I mean, I find myself doing this, like I'm not explaining it that well, but I would just say if you can find this film,
Yeah.
which it's available on the Criterion Collection, so I'm sure it's on a Criterion streaming channel. But this is, it's under 90 minutes, and there's like it's unlike anything I think you could really see. The filmmaker, I believe, just passed away last year, and also had his like magnum opus, last film, and I don't remember what it's called, but it was like a 3 hour film. But this, that filmmaker is just very talented in, from reading about House, is like he basically, it was not written by him, but the script was given to him, and he had to basically beg to make it, because it was from the same studio, Toho Films, who did all the Godzilla movies,
Mhm.
because like he wasn't a staff member. Usually, you're not allowed to direct it. But then he also talked to his pre-teen daughter about, what would you like to see in a movie, and so some of the elements of this movie that seemed kind of wild and crazy, you know were that way because it came from his young daughter
Yeah.
himself. So very, very unique. I can't suggest it higher enough.
Oh no, same here. I just watched it for the first time in the last maybe 2 years, and don't worry about if you synopsized it or explained it well, because I don't
Yeah.
think that you really can. It's bonkers. It's fun. It's crazy. It definitely, if you're looking for some good October stuff to watch, oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's in there. It actually, the aesthetic that jumped out at me has like kind of a, and I don't mean this in the content of it, but the aesthetic and the approach to it is like a kids TV show,
Yeah.
like just really popping colors and like this sense of like play
Yeah.
to it,
You're
even though
right.
some of it's really like, oh, did that piano just eat someone? But you know what I mean? Like a Pee Wee's Playhouse kind of aesthetic to it almost.
Yeah, because it like there's moments where it's like there's like this music and like happiness, and then all of a sudden a cat's like vomiting blood everywhere.
Right, right, right. But not like in a David Cronenberg approach, in like
Right.
TV, like a kids TV approach. But
Yeah.
and just as a quick shout out, I think the one you were referring to is Labyrinth of Cinema.
Yes, Labyrinth of Cinema,
Yeah.
which is a very, very another visual stunner.
Yeah.
Not in the J horror realm at all, but I would just say that's if you're looking for something that's unlike anything else that you're going to see here, definitely seek that one out as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, and clearly a passion project. He's writer, director, producer, editor.
Yeah,
And I looked that up while you were talking. I didn't just know that off the top of my head.
sure.
I was doing the same thing. I was like, oh, what was that called? Um, Yeah. So I have one other honorable mention I wanted to do, and it is one that I'm going to be a little judgy here and say, unfortunately, it did get an American remake.
Sure.
Actually, I think it even went on to make maybe two or three in the series. And that is Pulse from
Mm.
2001, which is Kiyoshi Kurosawa, no relation to the master Kurosawa. He did this movie Pulse. It came out in 2001. He's the writer, the director, so it's like a story he clearly wanted to do and was really into. I don't want to do too much of a plot synopsis on it because it would take a while. Not that it's like
Yeah.
convoluted, but he did this great. I'm a total sucker for this kind of style. In this case, he's doing a dual narrative. So he's got two parallel storylines that are moving along, and you're like, what? Why are these like clearly these two stories are telling something, and you're waiting for them to meet, and they do meet and overlap, and then you get like I don't know if it's fully like the third act or not, but like when they do finally meet, you're like I remember just feeling like oh yes, because like they're together, and then we'll say the climax plays out as like a combined story.
Yeah.
So part of it is in this parallel structure. There's the one main character is like a florist, and this other guy. So there's a girl florist, and there's this guy who's a student. I think he's like an economics student, and they're both experiencing kind of a ghost, like a literal ghost in the machine, like it's a technology
Mm.
kind of horror movie. So it's a little very different from Audition, but it plays into some of the other things that I've noticed within the J horror thing of like the supernatural, but also kind of combines with like the psychological kind of slow burn. But this one, by the time it builds up, you're getting actually not too dissimilar from The Ring, I think, because I think it's like a computer disc that's passed around at some point in this one. So it's like
Okay.
there's
Yeah.
like a haunting to the technology that the folks are using. And if you watch it now, yeah, it's a little bit dated, but it doesn't fetishize the technology in the way that like something like on the Hollywood end, like Hackers did, which is kind of a
Yeah.
fun campy
Yeah.
watch at this point, but it wasn't. It's like it doesn't revel in like, oh, here's all the tech works kind of thing. It's just like it's the vehicle to get the ghost, the horror story going.
Yeah.
But then you do get, by the time this one builds to its climax, you do get through like a burning, everything's on fire, apocalyptic Tokyo downtown setting. The trailer itself has this, so I don't feel like I'm spoiling it too much, but the trailer, even the American version does, has like, I think it's like a passenger jet just like falling from the sky and crashing into this. Like it's a big kind of disaster spectacle by the end. And you're just like, oh my God. Like it starts from this kind of like intimate kind of horror that these individuals are experiencing. Then the two storylines come crashing together, and then you get this kind of like apocalyptic, like large scale disaster movie by the end. You're like, oh shit, everything's really falling apart here.
I'm curious because like I've never really heard of this one. Like who did the American remake star?
Oh, the American remake is actually I own the remake, but I haven't watched yet. Wes Craven wrote it. I just looked it up real quick because I wasn't remember off the top of my head. Kristen Bell.
Oh yes. Okay.
It all came out in 2006.
Yeah.
And they also did Pulse 2 Afterlife and Pulse 3, which were straight to DVD or whatever the form. No, it would have been DVD for the format there. I didn't watch it. I bought it a while ago, and I was like, I'll pop it in maybe.
Yeah.
Someday, but
yeah, I do vaguely remember. Yeah, I remember that
trailers for it, but I don't. Yeah, like I said, I haven't popped it in yet. But
interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah, no, the original. I mean, Wes Craven's writing it. It may not be all bad, but
yeah,
he didn't direct it, so maybe that's saying something. Where he's like, "Yeah, just give me the paycheck, out my way." But no, the original one. Like again, if you're, it's October. If you're looking for some good scares that are outside of the United States and Hollywood, I definitely would give Pulse a recommend.
Absolutely. So, what film did you end up picking?
So I ended up picking one that I had a lot of fun with our zombie challenge last one, where it was one that I'd never even heard of. So I kind of went down that route of like, okay, I'm gonna go through J horror. I want to pick one I've never even heard the title of before, and jump in on that one. So I ended up running across this one I'd never heard of, but I'd seen another movie this director has made actually. So I almost went with the movie Suicide Club.
Oh, okay.
But I didn't go with that one. The director, Sion Sono, Sionsono, Sion Sono, he did Suicide Club, but he also wrote and directed this movie from 2015 called Tag.
Okay.
ピンポンパンポン突然ですが重要なお知らせです全国の JK の皆さんあなたたちはちょっとふてぶてしいので少し 数を減らすことにします。リアル鬼ごっこスタートです。明るく楽しく元気いっぱい鬼から逃げてください。
This is another one that kind of harkens back to our time travel films episode, where I don't want to say too much because there's a lot of great discoveries to be had in this story. It's an 85 minutes. It moves at a clip. It's like you're not going to be bored with any moment of this movie. And actually, to be honest, there's a little bit, not quite time travel, but time travel adjacent element to this one. Let me just tell you, like, kind of like the opening scene to see if it hooks you here.
Sure.
So we have the main character, Mitsuko. I didn't write down the actress name. Apologies to that actress. But Mitsuko, she's kind of quiet, thoughtful. She's writing poetry on a bus. It's a school bus. It doesn't look like a school bus. It looks like they're on a field trip, maybe a little bit fancier bus. But it's with all of her classmates, and they're all dressed in the matching, school uniform sort of thing. It's all girls on the bus. And they're all having a good time. Everybody's chatting, but she's just quietly writing poetry. So you get a sense of like who this character is on this whole bus. And she drops the pen that she's writing with when one of her friends wants to like read some of her poetry, grabs the notebook. She drops her pen. She bends down to get her pen. And as she bends down to get her pen, what seems to be the wind picks up and blows over her bus. And as it does that, it cuts the entire top of the bus off and takes all of the upper sections of her classmates with it.
Oh my God.
So everyone's dead. There's blood everywhere, but she is spared.
Wow.
So like, that's an image, right?
Yeah.
Holy shit. What is going on here? It's like the mystical, they're out in the woods too. They're out like a country road. So like they're not like, downtown, urban environment or anything. And so she's just like in shock, obviously. Like this girl is traumatized.
Yeah.
And she's walking around and she hears the wind. She's like, whoa, what? And so she ducks and she sees another bus get halved. And she's like, well, shit. So she's like trying to get to the edge. So she's warning some other people. There's a couple other people out on like bikes, I think, or taking a hike, and she's warning them. So you see some carnage in the first like 7 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, what? Kind of Takashi Miike level, honestly. Like it's really over the top. Fair warning, though, it's also a bit of digital where you're like, okay, you're not using real blood here. I give this one a pass. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But so she ends up grabbing, she goes down, she escapes from that. She's down by a river and she sees even more bodies, but she's covered in blood, and she grabs like some other clothing off another body that's clean. And so she puts on this, so she has a new clean school outfit. And then she ends up walking back and she gets to school, and every one of her friends is at school. They're all totally fine. And she's like, what the fuck is going on? And so every few, you get little scenes, segments, full, like scenarios play out. And then all of a sudden she's like, wait, why is everything different again? And so you get this kind of, I'll give it a hint of like, maybe not quite Groundhog Day, because it's not repeating the same day, but maybe more like Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Okay.
We're shifting amongst experiences. You can tell within the first 15, 20 minutes, like, wait, what, how's everybody alive? Oh, okay. And then like another horrible thing happens and you're like, okay, what's going on? Oh, wait, now she's in downtown area and her hair's different. What's going on here?
Yeah.
It doesn't let you get your feet under you watching this movie until probably like the hour and 10-minute mark, when it kind of starts telling you a little bit about maybe what's going on. The only other thing I want to mention is as you watch the movie, that opening bit, maybe the opening 15, 20 minutes, you're like, there's some, in my opinion, uncomfortable like upskirt shots.
Okay. Yeah.
Japanese schoolgirls, the school uniform, blah, blah, blah. And you're like, what? Why are we doing this with a camera? Right. The director is doing something. He's doing something with why he's filming things the way he's filming it. And sure. I think there's the reveal, which I'm not going to spoil at all here. I think the reveal gives it like a really interesting, another kind of like feminist horror bent to the script, where you're like, oh shit, like, okay, you're doing something with this story.
Yeah.
And I really dug it, because like I was just like jaw on the floor, because like the violence is over the top. Like if you want some gore, if you want all that with your horror, it is in there. Some of it's comical, some of it's like great hand-to-hand combat, but it'll definitely satisfy the gore out there. Again, it is mostly digital, so if you want the Tom Savini practical effects, there's some there, but it's mostly going to be digital. So
this would not be related to the late or 2018 tag with like John Hamm, I'm gonna guess.
No, couldn't be farther from that. Honestly, I don't really know why it's called Tagged. I know it's based on a novel, or maybe it was a manga, I forget, but it's based on other source material.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know that one was called Tag, but really, like, Tag, we're doing a new story. Tag, we're doing a new story. Like maybe there's an element to that
Yeah.
with it, but I caught it on Tubi, so it's out there. It's pretty easily available. No relation to that other movie at all. I will say, just because I was watching on Tubi, which I adore their deep dive into like a lot of catalog titles, but
Mhm.
man, their commercial breaks are at really, really inopportune times.
That's yeah. No, I will agree. That I mean, there's such a great service, and it's free, but
Yeah,
yeah, you do got to suffer through
you got to do
the
some
occasional ad.
breaks. Yeah, but no, I highly recommend that one. What did you pick for this watch challenge, Mike?
So I also I wanted to like kind of expand a little bit and look at something that was maybe a little bit older, but also it was a film that I had heard about just by reputation, and finally got to watch it. I found it actually on Canopy for free, so another plug for another free streaming service. But I ended up watching 1989's Tetsuo the Iron Man. Have you seen this one?
Not in quite a while.
Okay. Quite a very unique film, to say the least. But it's just a hair over an hour, but it is
Really?
it's only 67 minutes.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's a black and white, very low budget movie. Basically, I'll give you the IMDb synopsis. A businessman accidentally kills the metal fetish-ish, who gets revenge by slowly turning the man into a grotesque hybrid of flesh and rusty metal. So this is directed by Shinya Tsukamoto. I'm probably butchering that terribly, but a visual stunner. I will say. I mean, this was very very much lived up to its reputation of being a what the fuck kind of kind of movie.
Yeah.
And kind of like hyper kind of kinky sexual in a way. As our man is being turned into the Iron Man, he has this lover, and they have like these really like kind of randy sex scenes.
Yeah.
But it basically, some of the images of this film I think might kind of, as Ringu kind of haunted me. I think there's the image where you first see this like metal rod going into the man's skin, and you see like these like maggots kind of eating at it.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah, I mean, it just kind of gave me the willies. But and I once again, I would not consider myself an experimental expert, but now having spent a lot of time with Cleveland Robert Banks, who does a lot of that stuff,
Yeah.
I think there was something about the style of the filmmaking that kept me interested, because there's not a ton of dialogue. It's almost like a silent film in a way. I mean, there is dialogue, but I don't think it's the point of the story that the filmmaker was trying to tell. It was more about showing that man can, decisions that we make can sometimes have bad results for people. I do know that it is a part of a series that two subsequent films were made from this that were a little, they kind of went up a little bit in production value and everything. But this was definitely, I think it's worth seeing at least once, just so you can say you can kind of check that off your cinematic, lists.
Yeah.
But results may vary based on your tastes, I would say.
Yeah. Or tolerance for what you will watch in a movie,
Yes,
maybe as
yes.
well.
Because well, like I said, being that it is brief in its runtime, it can be maybe a little more digestible for some people, but some people might just turn it off and just probably think it's mindless garbage or something like that.
I would say if you do give it a shot, and I would recommend giving it a shot. I don't remember it too well, but I remember it scarring me. Kind of
Yeah.
like you were saying, if you're searching out horror, though, I feel like that's what you want. You want a memorable experience that you're like, I'm not sure what I like. Some of the stuff I seek out in horror is like not really knowing how to process what I just watched. Sometimes,
Yeah.
I mean, granted, sometimes I just want some 80s slasher tropes. That's totally fine too. But I think it's an interesting genre because it can really push the limits with like I said earlier, I was like watching Audition the first time. I was like, I never thought of doing that on film. Like, holy shit, that's crazy.
Yeah.
This one, I think, by getting a visceral reaction, like if you're a Cronenberg fan, I think we've already mentioned once on the show at least, it would definitely pique your interest. I think there's some stuff you're like Cronenberg had to have seen this movie.
Oh
I don't know
yeah.
if it was in '89 or not, but like he definitely had to have seen this movie. Yeah, I remember I watched this one was like a VHS watch, so it's been ages, and then Tetsuo 2 Body Hammer was like one of my early memories. I didn't see it when it came out, but it was programmed when I was in college. There was a theater down the road that did cult stuff every weekend, and that was when I'm like, "What the fuck is this movie?" And then, so actually, yeah, I watched Tetsuo 2 first, and then we found in our film department you could rent VHS and some DVDs. And there we mentioned, oh, we saw Tetsuo 2 Body Hammer over the weekend or whatever, and then Mark, the guy that ran the department, he's like, "Oh, here," and just handed us the first one. And we're like, "Okay." But yeah, I mean, especially if you want to expand your horizons as you're like picking out horror stuff to watch in October, like definitely, like this is a great one. I feel like it's fairly easy to find. Like you
Yeah.
said, Canopy's got it. Streaming free with a library card. Throw in some avant-garde stuff and see, expand your horizons a little bit.
No, absolutely. I mean, if it, it's once again very off kilter, and like I said, results may vary based on what your tastes are, but I would say give it a shot, and you just might find that you enjoy it.
Well, I think you gave a good kind of sample of Tetsuo, so people can either like, oh, that sounds interesting, or oh, God, no, pass, hard pass. So like, like you said, mileage may vary, but know what you're getting into. That's just not a casual like, oh, this is a great fun, 90s like Scream style meta horror movie from Hollywood. Like that is not what this one is.
Absolutely. I do want to say before we start to kind of wrap up this episode,
Yeah.
The last one that we did about zombies, I was kind of called out for maybe looking at things too new. So I do want to give at least one little quick shout out to something that I do plan to watch over this weekend.
Mm-hmm.
I just due to a little bit of hectic schedule, I couldn't cross it off the list, but I just didn't want to end the episode without mentioning probably one of the most famous Japanese horror films, Anibaba. So that is one, from 1964. It's widely regarded as probably the best, and it's available on HBO Max, but
Nice.
there also is a very nice Criterion disc out there, from what I've seen. So Mr. Banks, I at least gave you some historical picks there.
Oh, I do remember this poster. Yeah, I was just looking at Criterion real quick. Yeah.
Absolutely.
No, I haven't seen this though. That's good. I'll have to put that on.
Yeah, I've just heard it's the best. Just
Yeah.
time is always a great enemy.
Right.
But our official watch challenges for J Horror are Tag from 2015 and Tetsuo from 1989. Aaron, what challenge do we have in front of us for next time?
Up next, we are keeping with our month of horror shows going. It is October as we're putting out these episodes. Since we're doing J horror, I had a couple other ideas in mind, but I was like, let's continue like a little world tour of horror and dive into giallo films, giallo horror from generally from Italy. If you're unfamiliar with that term, it's worth just a quick Google. We'll give you some basic results. But it's more of like a horror thriller, usually a murder mystery involved. But again, we're trying out some different areas of horror within that genre around the world, just sort of seeing how other cultures, react to, like how other cultures package like the fears that are, maybe within those cultures, and how that might be kind of specific to different countries. If you'd like to send any of your picks, if you're like, oh my God, Jolly, they gotta watch this one, please send them our way. Just follow the links that are in the show notes, and wherever you're listening to this right now, there's going to be some active links for you to click on. Please, any recommendations? Our schedules are a little bit freer now, so we'll have some time to dive in these particular ones. Or if you just like to suggest topics as well, similar instructions, follow those show notes, and we will dive in with whatever you are submitting.
Absolutely. Well, until next time, folks, rate and review the show wherever you find it, and we'll see you with the next challenge.